see massive disruption to the U.S. economy. You could see a lot of Americans die. There are tens of thousands in the region, both military and non-military. And you could see some of our closest allies in the world, the Gulf states, who supply the energy for civilization around the world, you could see them disabled by this. And then you could see massive refugee crises around the world because the plan is to take out the leadership of Iran, but there's no plan after that. So it would be an open wound, 92 million people on a huge landmass, and that would continue the invasion of Europe by immigrants. A lot of them would wind up in the Gulf states, directly across the Persian Gulf, and a lot of them would wind up here in the United States. We're looking at it through the wrong frame. This is not about protecting the United States, obviously. It's not about even protecting Israel. If you're Israel and your main goal is not to get hit and to keep your cities safe, the last thing you're going to do is try to provoke Iran into lobbing ballistic missiles into your country. You would never do that. No, this is about sweeping away any opposition to Israel's regional hegemony.
They don't want you to see this coming, Tucker Carlson. Something is moving quietly, deliberately, and fast, and most people have no idea. Right now, the US military is moving on a scale not seen since 2003 with warplanes, carrier groups, and missile ships positioning in the Middle East, and aircraft massing in ways that do not happen by accident. This is not deterrence meant to stop a war. This is staging and pre-positioning, and it only happens when decisions are already being prepared behind closed doors.
Believes, as the only nuclear-armed power in the Middle East, that it should have control over the region. And by the way, I'm not attacking them. Every nuclear-armed power feels that way. We feel that way. What's going on in South America? We have a right to weigh in on that because we're the big dog. They feel that way. And what stands in their way? Well, Iran primarily, also Turkey, and then the 6 Gulf energy-producing monarchies, primarily Qatar, because they're disobedient. They don't follow Israel's lead on a lot of different things. And this war, and of course the United States, because the United States is constantly telling Israel, you can do this, you can't do that. Trump's like, no, you can't take over the entire West Bank and kick all the Christians out or whatever. The United States is a constraint on Israel. So they want the U.S. out of the region.
The last time America looked like this in that region, we invaded Iraq, and that war lasted 20 years, cost trillions, killed hundreds of thousands, and left the Middle East more unstable than we found it. But here's the terrifying part. That was a country of 25 million people with a broken military. Iran has 90 million people, a functioning military, ballistic missile capability, and deep relationships with proxy forces across the entire region. This is not Iraq. This is something far larger and far more dangerous.
To your country, you would never do that. No, this is about sweeping away any opposition to Israel's regional hegemony. Israel believes, as the only nuclear-armed power in the Middle East, that it should have control over the region. And by the way, I'm not attacking them. Every nuclear-armed power feels that way. We feel that way. What's going on in South America? We have a right to weigh in on that because we're the big dog. They feel that way. And what stands in their way? Well, Iran primarily, also Turkey, and then the 6 Gulf energy-producing monarchies, primarily Qatar, because they're disobedient. They don't follow Israel's lead on a lot of different things. And this war, and of course the United States, because the United States is constantly telling Israel, you can do this, you can't do that. Trump's like, no, you can't take over the entire West Bank and kick all the Christians out or whatever. The United States is a constraint on Israel. So they want the U.S. out of the region. Why wouldn't they? And they're, of course, pivoting to India. Israel has decided it needs a superpower to exist. It's only 9 million people. It's a really small country. So they have to be in alliance with a larger nuclear-armed power. They have to, or they won't exist. And they've picked India. Prime Minister Modi was in the Knesset yesterday and meeting with Netanyahu yesterday. And that is the plan. Israel will pivot from the United States to India. And I don't think anyone's even pretending that's not happening because support for Israel in the United States is going down. So this is the last opportunity for Israel to use the U.S. military to sweep away one of the few remaining speed bumps on the way to controlling the entire Middle East and having hegemony. And what does that mean? Well, Israel would like to expand its borders.
So the question every American should be screaming right now is simple. What do we get out of this? Not Israel, not Saudi Arabia, not the defense contractors. What does the average American citizen get from a war with Iran? And the answer, when you actually search for it, is nothing. There is no clearly articulated national interest. There is no defined victory condition. Nobody in Washington has stood stood up and explained what winning even looks like. They never do, because if they told you the truth, you would never agree to it.
About Americans' opinions. So you've got 350 million Americans. Yeah. They voted in this last election on the basis, in part, of the promise no more wars. Okay, so now we're about to have a war. It looks like 80% of people are against it. In that range, let's say 70%, but nowhere near majority support for this war.
Here is what makes this moment even more disorienting. Within the span of a few months, the official story has already changed. First, we bombed targets. Then the mission was over. Then suddenly the mission wasn't over. Then new justifications appeared. Then old justifications were quietly dropped. This is not a strategy. This is improvisation dressed up as policy. And when the story keeps changing, it means the real story is something they don't want you to know.
Into Syria, they're already taking land there, and into Lebanon, same thing. And maybe even extending farther north from that. But Israel wants to be physically larger. Every country does. We do. This is just a feature of human nature. But they want to be larger, and they can't because Iran's in the way, Qatar's in the way, the U.S. is in the way, and Turkey's in the way. So one by one, they're diminishing them. Does anyone think America will be stronger after this war? Of course not.
They keep pointing at Iran's nuclear program as the reason we have to act. So let's actually look at that claim. Iran does not currently have a nuclear weapon. Iran does not currently have a delivery system capable of reaching the continental United States. The idea that American cities are in imminent danger from Iran is not a serious military assessment. It's a fear-based sales pitch designed to shut down debate before it starts. The moment you accept that framing, you stop asking inconvenient questions. And inconvenient questions are exactly what they cannot afford right now.
Said, I don't want to do this. I want a diplomatic solution. I don't want to go to war. I ran against going to war. I don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's what he says in public and in private, on the phone and in person and on stage. And so I believe it.
Here's another inconvenient fact. Donald Trump has repeatedly stated, both publicly and privately, that he does not want this war. He ran on ending foreign conflicts. He made diplomacy with Iran part of his platform. There is no evidence that Trump personally wants American soldiers dying in the Persian Gulf. So if the most powerful man in the world doesn't want this war, then who does? That question should terrify you. Now think about what a war with Iran actually costs. The first thing that happens is an energy shock. Iran controls access to the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that narrow waterway every single day. Close it or destabilize it, and you are looking at an immediate global economic crisis. Gas prices don't just rise, they explode, supply chains fracture, inflation that already feels unbearable gets worse by a factor you don't want to calculate.
It is a fact, and this is the analysis of the Pentagon, that if this war goes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, the United States will not have enough munitions to wage a major war for 10 years. Okay? No war with a peer or near peer nation for 10 years because we don't have the industrial capacity to replace those munitions. We've already expended so many of them in defense of Israel in the last 12 months.
In Ukraine.
And in Ukraine. So it's like, there's no way that this helps the United States. We're not in a place to do it.
There are tens of thousands of American military personnel and civilians currently deployed across the Middle East. Every single one of them becomes a target the moment war begins. And a nation of 90 million people doesn't collapse in a few weeks. They fight back. They use proxies. They hit bases in Iraq, Syria, the Gulf. And then comes the refugee crisis. A destabilized Iran of 90 million people produces a migration wave that makes 2015 look like a rehearsal. Europe gets flooded, and some of that pressure lands here. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has been warning for months that American munitions stockpiles are already strained. Ukraine consumed enormous quantities of precision weapons. So did Israel. Military analysts have said a sustained multi-week conflict could deplete reserves to a point where America loses its ability to credibly deter threats elsewhere in the world. China watches all of this from a distance and quietly takes notes.
We have 92 million people that has been under sanctions since 1979. It is an enormous country. It's the oldest civilization in the world, and they have a huge non-nuclear arsenal of ballistic missiles. Huge. It's the estimates of this are publicly available. You could bore yourself all day reading about it. This is a very serious thing. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, almost exactly 33 years ago, That country had 25 million people, and it was 1/6 the size of Iran. And we were there for 20 years, and we never fully pacified it. This is a country of 92 million people. And like reality matters, actually. Like the number of people who live in your country, the armaments they possess, its landmass. These are relevant facts for people who plan wars, and they help determine the outcomes of those wars and occupations. So this is pure insanity.
So why would anyone push for this? Here's where the explanation shifts from strategy to something more uncomfortable. This isn't about preventing Iran from attacking anyone. Iran hasn't attacked the United States. The threat model doesn't hold up under examination. What this is actually about is regional architecture. It's about who controls the Middle East at a structural level. Remove Iran and you remove the last significant military counterweight to Israeli regional dominance. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a strategic objective that has been openly discussed in foreign policy circles for decades. Iran is not the only obstacle being considered. Turkey is a wild card that doesn't fully align with these goals. Several Gulf states, Qatar in particular, maintain independent relationships that complicate the picture. The United States itself, with its democratic processes and public opinion requirements, is described in some of these frameworks as a constraint. Think about that. America is listed as a problem to be managed, not a partner to be consulted.
I'm aware of in this administration who is aggressively pushing for this war. All of the pressure is coming from Netanyahu. It's why he went to the White House 7 times in 1 year. It wasn't to be nice. It was to push for regime change in Iran. I'm not attacking him. That's not anti-Semitic. It's not even anti-Israel. It's an acknowledgement of the truth. And no matter what you slander people with, in the end, the truth remains true. Sorry. And so they want this. The only reason we would do it.
But not just him.
The window for action, according to people pushing this agenda, is closing. American public support for foreign intervention is near historic lows. The political will to sustain a major war is fragile. And there is a growing theory circulating in certain circles that the long-term strategic patron for this project is not Washington, but New Delhi. As America's appetite for global intervention shrinks, some are looking toward India as the next superpower anchor in the region. That calculation has a time limit, which creates urgency, which creates pressure, which is exactly how wars get started.
Mainly, the United States is moving toward a big war, a real war with Iran, a regime change war. The biggest war we've had since the invasion of Iraq in the spring of 2003, and Israel is driving that. We are doing this at the behest, at the demand of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So it seems like now is the time for more Americans to understand the dynamic between the U.S. and Israel and to call attention to that.
Benjamin Netanyahu has visited the White House more times than almost any foreign leader in modern history. Each visit comes with a specific ask. Each ask gets amplified by a network of voices in Washington and in American media who treat Israeli strategic objectives as if they are identical to American ones. They are not. A foreign government's interest and your country's interest can overlap. They can also diverge sharply. Knowing the difference is not anti-Semitism. It's basic geopolitics. But the moment you raise that distinction, the apparatus moves to silence you.
What people like Levin, whom I'm not attacking, I feel sorry for because he's clearly living in hell, but what they're trying to do is a species of witchcraft. And it's really simple. You repeat something until it becomes true. Khomeini must die. We're going into war. We're going to knock off the government. This is good for us. Anyone who's against it is an anti-Semite, a Nazi, should be expelled. Benedict Arnold, not allowed in the White House. You keep repeating things that are untrue until they become true. You speak, you create truth by speaking. In the beginning was the word.
That is the mechanism. They don't win the argument. They disqualify the argument. Opponents of this war are labeled isolationists, traitors, or worse. The moral framework gets poisoned before the debate can begin, and then war stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like an inevitability. That transformation from choice to inevitability is the most dangerous thing happening in American politics right now. It's how you get dragged into something catastrophic without ever being asked.
Free person. Say it and it becomes true. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. And nobody is making the case for how does this help the United States? How does this make us richer, safer, happier? Zero. And my concern is if this actually happens, and it's likely to, what then?
There is a deeper layer to this that very few people are willing to say out loud. The countries targeted over the last 2 decades share a specific characteristic. They operated outside the Western financial system. They had independent central banks. They conducted energy transactions outside the dollar. Iraq sold oil in euros before the invasion. Libya was building a gold-backed currency. Iran sells energy to China and participates in BRICS payment alternatives that bypass dollar-denominated systems. This is not a coincidence. Financial sovereignty and regime change have been following the same map for 20 years.
I guess what I'm saying is America's not thriving at all. And
you think it's Israel's fault?
I don't think it's Israel's
okay,
fault.
well, good.
No,
because I think
I just think that what we're doing isn't working at all. And America's not rich.
I think the president is doing some amazing things to get us back on track.
Not attacking Trump.
Okay.
I'm merely saying that over, say, the last 20 years, America's not gotten richer or freer at all. And I come to Israel and the infrastructure, we were flying in, and I said to my buddy, I was like, man, first of all, looks great. I love the agriculture in Israel because it's beautiful. I love green. Looks a lot nicer than our country. And it has higher standard of living. It has nicer roads than the United States. And so it's like, okay, why are we sending all this money to a country that has a higher standard of living than ours?
Then there is the story of what happened to Tucker Carlson's own production team. Detained at an Israeli airport, questioned in what witnesses described as intelligence-style interrogations. No intervention from American embassy officials. The U.S. Embassy, funded by American taxpayers, sided with the foreign authority conducting the interrogation rather than protecting American citizens abroad. That single incident tells you more about where loyalties actually lie than any press conference ever could. The moral questions at the center of this conflict have no clear answers. Claims to land break down under scrutiny. The right of return is applied selectively, and ancient Christian communities are restricted despite posing no threat. We are told civilian deaths are an unavoidable cost of fighting terrorism, which means accepting that innocent people must pay for crimes they did not commit. Most people would reject that if asked, but they are never asked. Gaza is described in the language of biblical annihilation, modern war justified by ancient scripture, while journalists are blocked and casualty figures conflict. When information is controlled this tightly, it is not to protect the truth, it is to hide it.